Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today we unlocked the Hawk. He is a 4-cost, 1-power card that has the ongoing ability of plus 2 power for each card in your opponent's deck. Now, originally I thought there were a couple of ways that he might be good or might be able to be utilized. One of those was adding rocks into the opponent's deck. Use something like a Korg, a Rock Slide, an Odin, an Absorbing Man, and just really lean in to Hawk and his power, but it felt really inconsistent. It didn't quite have enough power push or feel valuable enough to really invest all of those resources in. And then of course, you don't always draw into your Hawk either. And so I tested him out in a lot of different shells. I tested him out in an all-out negative shell that used Black Widow and Korg. I used him in just a rock list, and it didn't do very well either. And I had settled on using him in a Devil Dino control style list, very similar to KM Best's version, but instead of Moon Girl and Angela, I added in Maria Hill and Hawk, and it did very well, but a lot of times Hawk was not the win condition. Hawk was not the reason I was winning those games. And around that time, I had settled on this being kind of the shell that I was going to put him in, that sometimes he was going to be our win condition, but he was going to be more of a utility card. Something where in a standard game, he just has a fairly decent power push of about 7 at the end of the game, which is going to be on par with most of your other cards, and he doesn't really have that huge downside either, and he can just sometimes get buffed up from things like Thor that your opponent played, or things like Subterranea. He gets buffed up massively. But around that time, the Bynx created a video on a Darkhawk build that runs a negative, and it puts in a Surfer shell as well. And Hawk is in there just kind of as a good card to be inverted, and it ended up working out really well. And the list that Bynx ran in his video is this one. And I tested this out just a little bit. I played 114 games using this list. At that point, I wasn't necessarily testing anymore. I was just playing. It felt really solid. It felt really consistent. I was able to really easily identify when I had the win condition or when I needed to retreat. For the most part, I did lose a couple of 8-cube games that absolutely gutted me along the way. But out of the 114 games, I won 64 of those for a 56% win rate. I lost 50, and I had a net cube gain of 73 cubes. So an average of 0.6 per game, which is not terrible. It's a decent sample size. It's fairly consistent. As long as you are consistently climbing, then it's going to be a good list. And while this may not be just the most absurd list in the world, it does stand up very well against a lot of what we're seeing in the meta. So a Leech, a Leader, or just any other strong Surfer list or strong Death Wave, it does fairly well in most of those matches. Now, if you don't get the high roll against some of those matchups, you might have to fold, you might have to retreat whenever it's not looking advantageous for you. But a lot of times you can trick them and end up getting 8 cubes out of their leader play because you can push some extra power even if your cards get leeched. If you have an Angela on the board, if you have a Bishop on the board, their leader is not going to copy as much value out of your cards as you get out of them. And so you can swing those games in your favor a lot of the times. And so overall, the list runs very well. I used this list to finish off the Infinite Climb on my second account on Sulky Hulky, and it served me fairly well. Overall, the list has a lot of different paths to find a win condition. So you can either use the Silver Surfer portion, so lean into Brood, your Bishop, your Ironheart, your 3-cost cards, and then buff them at the end of the game. Or you can lean into, if you get your Mr. Negative on 4, a lot of times that is going to be your ideal drop. Sometimes you just want to use Psylocke to ramp into an early Sarah, and that way you can kind of strategically start flooding your power onto the board. And if your Hawk gets hit with the inversion, he is a massive 1-cost 4 power that will typically be about 10 or 11 power over the course of the game, unless there are any kind of extra draw conditions, so like a Jubilee, an Angel, or a location that forces them to draw into additional cards. Otherwise, he's going to be a pretty standard 7 power drop that can give you the advantage in certain scenarios, and then other games you're going to want to ignore them altogether, and you're just going to want to go with the Silver Surfer path instead. But what this list does very well is that it has so many win conditions that it doesn't matter if you miss your Mr. Negative. It doesn't matter if you miss your Sarah or your Hawk or your Iron Man. A lot of times you're going to be able to find a way to push enough power in a high enough power to find a way to win. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump over into a couple of games. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, first up we have Nazari, and in our starting hand, we have some of the cards that would be really good if they got inverted with Mr. Negative. but that is okay. We have our Mr. Negative, our Iron Man, our Silver Surfer. We still have some really good resources that can be hit with the Mr. Negative. Now, a Psylocke here would have been beautiful. We would have snapped off of that. But without that, we are going to play it a little bit slower, a little bit safer. And so we have our Ironheart. And then we have Subterranea, which helps Hawk out massively. That is going to be a massive Hawk. All right, so we're going to go ahead and skip on 3. We will play our Mr. Negative naturally on 4. It looks like we are going to lose the Avengers compound lane. There's just not going to be much chance for us to compete for it. Actually, we could do the Brood, which would allow us to push a lot of power in there after the fact. We can forego dropping our Negative this game. We already have what's going to be a really strong finisher in our Hawk and our Mystique. And so maybe we drop Hawk on 5 into a Mystique to copy it, and then a Silver Surfer to buff up this flooded lane. I think I like that. It feels bad to have Mr. Negative on 4 and not want to drop him. That's not something I'm used to, or not something we see very often. But they do use a Brood of their own. And so unless we do something like an Ironheart, or something that is really going to help elevate that power level, we're not going to be able to reach that lane if they have their Silver Surfer in hand. Now, the solace, or the only potential upside that we have, is that Subterranea was one of the locations. There's less chance that they have their Silver Surfer to buff up their cards. And so they do have Daredevil. They have a Mr. Fantastic that comes down that pushes power to the left and the right into the Yellow Jacket and Mr. Sinister. Very interesting. And so I'm wondering if just doing a Mystique... and a Silver Surfer is enough. So even if they do have the Silver Surfer that comes down, that would buff up this lane, and then we have a lot of flexibility here. So they do the Silver Surfer, we lose this lane, but we should be able to keep pace and outpower them here and here. Our Mystique is going to be a 16 power copy of the Hawk. That is a huge... We're not doing it again. We can do the joke one time. We're going to take that 1 cube. That is the first game that we have played with this deck. We're going to take that 1 cube. Let's jump over into the next one. All right. Next up, we have Selenar, and the game just wants us to snap. So we have Elysium. We also have Mr. Negative in our starting hand, so we're going to be able to drop him on turn 3. If we had Psylocke as well, we could actually drop a Mr. Negative on 2, which would be massive. But even dropping him a turn early on 3 is still going to be really, really big. And they do throw down a Goose, so that tells me this might be a Silver Surfer build. But between Elysium, Mr. Negative, and Sarah, we should be able to position ourselves in a way to push whatever resource we need to into this location. A regular Iron Man would become 3 cost. We could push that there, an inverted Iron Man. But they do use... They do change Elysium before we can drop our Mr. Negative, so we won't be able to do that on 3. So now we're looking for really any other playline, and we don't have a lot to go off of. So we could use the Hawk on 4, but that's still not huge. We have Hawk and Mystique, so we can have 2 copies of it. I think we just give up the flooded lane. I thought about throwing a Mystique there just so that we could push an additional 3, but they did run Juggernaut, so it didn't hurt us to not play there. We're actually not going to be able to play our big high-cost cards. Ooh, we can't do Hawk either place. Oof. So between the Goose, the Big House, which counts as another Goose, and then Storm, we don't have any strategic positioning. So there's really no point in trying to push any further. We can't drop Sarah anywhere. We can't drop Mr. Negative anywhere. So we're going to go ahead and jump out of this game and jump back into the next one. We're going to mitigate it. It's 2 cubes, and we can realize our loss. As long as we don't get surprised by a last turn play and lose 8, then we can consistently just mitigate our losses. All right, next up we have Jay-Chu. In our starting hand, we have both our Hawk, Mystique, and Iron Man. I guess all 3. And it looks like we're going up against a Patriot deck. So depending on what we draw for the rest of the game, we could outpace or outpower a negative deck. Given the right scenario, I think we're going to be able to stack the Kunlun location. We might avoid Vormir unless we get our Mr. Negative that we can drop on 4, maybe even a Psylocke we could play. I'm going to go ahead and skip on 3. It feels really bad to skip, but I am going to skip on 3. They play a Debris, which does get destroyed in Murder World. They're just clearing that up for a last turn Ultron play. That way they can fill that up with resources as well. We do draw our Mr. Negative so that we can play that on curve on 4, but in our list we still have some okay cards to be inverted, but our big resources we already have. So Hawk, Mystique, Iron Man are all already in our hand. We could get Silver Surfer, which is going to be a pretty decent one. A Brood would also be a decent one to get inverted, but we are in for an uphill fight. I would expect, ooh, no, the Thing. So right now they don't have anything that is buffing their, vanilla cards. So we do get our Brood. This is going to be a 7 power card in the Hawk. We could do Brood into Hawk, into Mystique, into Silver Surfer. So that would be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 power in Unlun. It's going to be 7, it's going to be 10 power in Vormir, and then it's the biggest push that we do is in Murder World. They didn't snap, so I don't think they have any massive last turn play here. So we might be able to find our win against their mid roll. I don't think they're going to have the high roll. So the Blue Marvel is nice. The Squirrel Girl is also a pretty big push, but it's not going to be able to outpower our Brood. I don't think it outpowers our Hawk, and the Mystique does come down to copy Hawk. We're actually going to sweep and win all 3 locations. Now, they didn't have a good draw. For a Patriot build, they didn't have their ideal playline. We didn't have ours either, but we were still able to finagle and find a way to win. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Chrono, and we did just go up against them, and they had a really bad luck with the Sakaar pull. It pulled into their Swordmaster, which discarded one of their key resources. So the couple of cards that I saw them play were Goose, Mojo, Swordmaster, which discarded, I don't remember what it discarded, but they retreated after it. And so we know that they're running some kind of like mid-range value deck that uses the Swordmaster probably in lieu of a Maximus on the last turn play. So I would say that the cards that I saw are very much in line with a Silver Surfer build. And so with Subterranea, we actually have a Hawk that we're going to be able to push to try to make sure that we find the win. And with Subterranea, that makes him much, much bigger. I don't know where all of these Subterranea locations are coming from. It is not a common location by any means. I'm going to go ahead and drop Bishop into Kiln on this turn. Next turn, we can use Hawk as a way to guarantee that we win Asgard, and then we can continue to push power into Kiln after the fact. And so it was either that or we commit all to one or the other, but I think we try to kind of commit to both and see if we're able to find a way to win from that. Now, we don't want them to win Asgard, because if they do, they draw 2 cards, and that's going to make Hawk much less powerful. And so we're actually going to tempo drop the Hawk, which is pretty big. They do use Killmonger, which does destroy their Nova. They do have 7 power currently in Kiln, but we should be able to easily outpace that. Plus, we have the Silver Surfer. All of these rocks are just awful, though. I'm going to throw a couple onto the board, because that is going to buff our Bishop up. But it is abysmal how many rocks we drew into. I'm going to throw down 3. We're also going to throw a Psylocke into Asgard. Hawk should have a pretty decent way to win this lane. Now, if they have a Rogue, they actually steal Hawk's ability, and then dropping him early actually hurts us. So they do have a Sarah. They're going to be able to play quite a few cards here. Now, it depends on what they drew into, because I drew into all rocks. We actually drew into 4 out of the 5 rocks that were shuffled into our deck. And so if we can still find a way to win, that's going to be phenomenal. It looks like they didn't have much better luck. And so we did find a way to win by positioning our Bishop over into Kiln, using the Subterranea boost on Hawk to win Asgard and draw into those extra resources. Even though they were rocks, they didn't necessarily know that. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Kion. The first location is Shadowland. We don't have any of our huge resources in our hand. We have Sarah, so we could ramp into that. If we draw into Psylocke, we could ramp into Sarah a turn early, and then they end up getting their Silver Surfer pulled into in Sakaar. So we are going to snap off of that. Them sticking it out after Silver Surfer has already triggered would be a really tough battle. And so at that point, I would retreat in that scenario as well. All right, next up we have Jace 360. The first location is Elysium, so that's going to reduce the cost of all of our cards. We can actually do some really big, powerful plays, but we want to kind of play it strategically, kind of play it slowly. So I am just going to play our Bishop into Elysium for now. And then we're going to play the Patience game. we're going to wait it out a little by little to slowly drop our resources instead of flooding them onto the board. If we can draw into Mr. Negative here, that'd be the perfect top deck. If not, then okay, Silver Surfer's decent to have in hand. I don't think we play our Brood just yet. They did use a Lady Sif, which discarded a Captain Marvel, so I don't think they're going to have something like a Rogue or an Enchantress that we have to worry about. So I am just going to go ahead and play Hawk into Monster Metropolis. We're going to play it on curve while we're waiting for the rest of our cards to come up. Now, they could have just had the Lady Sif Ghost Rider combo, and then we're not sitting as pretty. Hopefully they don't have something that can take that Hawk's ability from us, an Enchantress or a Rogue. So we are going to use Angela and Mr. Negative here. That way we can start getting our inverted cards. It feels, because of Elysium, it feels like we're dropping Negative really late in the game, but realistically we're dropping him on curve. And so we are going to be able to draw into 2 of our inverted resources. Sarah is a good one to be able to draw into. We're pretty much going to be able to flood the board next turn. And I think we're going to play Sarah into Monster Metropolis. Ideally, I want to start pushing and competing for Elysium, but I think it's going to be better off if we do Brood into our Silver Surfer on the last turn into Elysium instead. And so we're going to go with Sarah. That's all we're going to drop, even though we could drop 1 additional resource here. We're going to wait. We're going to play it patiently. That is one of the biggest downsides that I see with the Elysium location, is that a lot of people flood that power onto the board a little too quickly, and they get a little too antsy, and then they don't have very many resources later on in the game. Now, it doesn't look like Jace did that. It looks like Jace was running a Hela discard, and so they could do a discard card and Hela here to make a pretty explosive last turn play. But we also have a pretty big play here as well. Doctor Strange that we got from the hub is actually a 3-cost base card as well, so he will get the upside from our Silver Surfer. We can do Brood as a way to push quite a bit of power here, and then we can follow that up with an Iron Man. I think we follow that up with a Doctor Strange into a Wolfsbane in the hub, and then a Silver Surfer in Monster Metropolis. So Doctor Strange is not going to have any space to move cards around. If they did, for some reason, an Aero into Elysium, that could disposition a couple of our cards and take away the upside from our Brood. Otherwise, we are completely capped out here. So they do use the Blade and probably a Hela here, right? To discard a big resource and then resummon it. So it is a Hela discard deck. And so it resummons it into Monster Metropolis. We do have enough power in Elysium that we win that one very easily. We're going to have enough power in the hub. I think we do lose Monster Metropolis, but that is absolutely fine. We don't need to win all 3, we just need to win 2. And even if their Helicarrier had popped over into the left lane or into the hub, so it didn't matter where that Helicarrier resummoned into, because we had a big enough power push that we would have won either way. All right, next up we have I'm a Cow. In our starting hand, we have Mystique, Hawk, and Mr. Negative, and now we have Silver Surfer. So we can still, if we drop Mr. Negative, we still have the potential to draw into some pretty good inverted resources in our Ironheart, in our Iron Man, and then the other ones are decent. They're just not as big of a high roll. And so we're going to go ahead and play Angela into Kunlun. We want to avoid Oscorp Tower and Hala for now, because we're not going to be able to compete for either one. Oscorp Tower is going to send that resource over into their lane, and then Hala, we would most likely lose our card. What we are going to do is play Mr. Negative on curve into Hala, and we're actually going to have 2 chances to draw into our Iron Man here. We have 5 cards left, so we have 2 out of 5 chance to draw into the inverted Iron Man. We have the Mystique to copy Iron Man's ability, and then we have Hawk. We have Brood that is still in the deck list. We have a lot of good resources, and since we're going to be able to drop Mr. Negative on curve, I am going to go ahead and snap into that play line. Now, they do use a White Queen, which copies Hawk, but that's not really going to give them much information or value for that matter. And so we're probably not going to play into Hawk as one of the main ways to win in this matchup. We're probably going to lean into some of the other resources that we have instead. We have 5 energy here. We could drop a Psylocke, but I think what we're going to do, we could drop the Darkhawk, but I think what we're going to do instead is we're going to play Psylocke into Wolfsbane. In Kunlun, we have the free Ironheart that we're going to be able to use. If they drop a Leech here, that is going to be very, very, very bad. And a Lizard White Queen, sometimes those are used in Leech decks, and they only dropped 1 card. No, so they used a Devil Dino in Oscorp Tower, which is okay. That is fine. We can outpower a Devil Dino with the right build. Getting a Brood or an Iron Man here is going to be really, really big. Mystique is not what we wanted to see though. So I would expect a leader play. Their leader is going to copy Hawk, but not Mystique because they have initiative. So they're going to get one version of Hawk, but they're not going to get two. So we would have 7 power on them there. They would get an extra 7. So we would need Ironheart to hit both of these cards. And so maybe if instead of doing it in Kunlun, we do something like Ironheart into Hala. That way, if they do a leader play here, that is okay. We keep the lead in the win condition in Kunlun. This is an extra 7. They would end up being 18. This could outpower a leader play in Hala. We're going to let it play out. They play 2 cards here. So Cosmo is not going to be enough to give them the win in Kunlun. We're going to do our Hawk, our Mystique, and our Ironheart, and that gives us the win in both the middle and the far right lane. Such a strange finisher for a 4-cube match. Usually you want to have a really strong last turn play. So I'm really surprised that they did both ongoing cards. So the Hawk that they stole from us with White Queen into the Devil Dino lane to push that one up further. Instead of pushing it into Hala, instead, we would have had the win condition either way. Now, if they had dropped it into Kunlun, they could have outpaced and outpowered us. I'm curious of the thought process of where these two lined up, but we were able to find the 4-cube win. This deck is very flexible. We didn't get any great ideal play lines into just a massive inverted negative Hawk plus the Mystique plus the Iron Man. But what we can get is we always have some resources that are going to be valuable for us in whatever matchup we find ourselves in. And so with that one, we are going to go ahead and end the video here. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more, I am going to leave a link to Bynx's version of this deck and his video of it in the description down below. Make sure to check it out. Show him some love as well. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like and a comment down below. And as always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.